On Canada's east coast, the Atlantic isn't the only thing that's dark and restless. It Came from the Maritimes is co-hosted by siblings Evan and Chelsea, who share the region's fog-shrouded legends, haunted lighthouses, ghost ships, and chilling folklore passed down through generations. It's maritime history at its most haunting. True crime, eerie local lore, and the mysteries that refuse to stay buried. For those drawn to the strange and storied side of the East Coast, It Came from the Maritimes releases new episodes every week. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron. And the Mississauga of Credit First, this land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path. A place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. Deep in the wilds of the Belle Province, legend howls beneath the moonlight. It begins, as many dark tales do, with a whisper that travels on the wind, a shadow glimpsed through frost-bitten trees. Something ancient stirs in the night. A creature neither fully man nor beast, cursed to roam the woods in hunger and torment. Known as the loup-garou, this perplexing shapeshifter has haunted the dreams and folklore of Quebec for centuries. But what makes Quebec's werewolf legend so uniquely haunting? Is it the blend of French colonial roots, Indigenous storytelling, the Catholic guild woven into its transformative curse, or perhaps it's how this myth continues to prowl the cultural consciousness long after the candles have burnt down and the Mass has ended. Tonight we dig up old bones and long-lost lore, from the tales whispered in rural villages to chilling encounters in the dark wilderness. We'll follow the paw prints of fear and fascination. The loup-garou isn't just a monster. It's a mirror held up to our deepest superstitions, moral dilemmas, and primal fear. At first glance, the loup-garou of Quebec and the European werewolf seem cut from the same cursed cloth. Both are shadowy shapeshifters, prowling through nightmares and folklore alike. But don't be fooled. Beneath the surface, they diverge in origins, meaning, and mystery. Let's start with the classic werewolf. This creature stalks its way out of Germanic and Norse myths, later adapted by medieval European as a symbol for wildness and sin. The transformation, a painful metamorphosis triggered by the full moon. It's chaotic, contagious, and bloody. One bite and you're marked for life. These stories serve as cautionary tales about losing control, becoming something monstrous, and falling victim to primal urges. Now, across the Atlantic, into the forests and villages of Quebec, where the loup-garou lurks in silence. It's not just a monster, it's a moral legend. Born from Old World French folklore and fused with Indigenous tales and Catholic beliefs, the loup-garou is often someone who's broken religious oath or strayed too far from spiritual obligations. Forget to attend Mass 3 Sundays in a row? You might wake up with fur and fangs. Unlike its European cousin, the loup-garou isn't contagious. It's a personal punishment, a reflection of guilt and inner torment. The transformation isn't always lunar. It's divine, symbolic, and steeped in cultural dread. Redemption is possible if you find someone who can recognize your cursed form and help break the spell. So while the werewolf is a beast of horror, the loup-garou is a creature of consequence. It echoes Quebec's deep-rooted ties with Catholicism, oral storytelling, and moral code that lingers long after the tale is told. The fangs may be familiar, but the folklore flavors are wildly different. The legend of the loup-garou traces its origins to the shadowed corners of medieval France, where fear, faith, and folklore were inseparable. The name itself is a fusion of Old French, loup meaning wolf, and garou derived from guerlafrus, describing a man burdened with curse of transformation. Stories of such creatures weren't told to entertain. They served as chilling reminders of spiritual consequence. An age when wolves prowled real woods and sin threatened eternal damnation. The idea of becoming a beast was a powerful deterrent. Transformation was believed to stem from spiritual transgression, violation of religious duties such as failing to observe Lent, neglecting confession before Easter, or abandoning Mass were not taken lightly. Legends warned that those who strayed too far from the church's protective fold could become something monstrous. The loup-garou embodied this fear, a man reborn as a creature of the night doomed to wander until penance was made. In the 17th century, these dark tales voyaged across the Atlantic with French settlers to the colony of New France, modern-day Quebec. Amid vast frozen forests and unfamiliar terrain, the myth found fertile ground. As communities adapted to harsh realities of colonial life, their stories shifted too. The legends of the loup-garou became more than inherited folklore. It grew into something localized, with moral framework. In this context, the creature reflected the intense influence of the Catholic Church on daily life. Tales of the loup-garou reinforced ecclesiastical discipline. Failing to attend 3 consecutive masses could provoke the transformation. The beast was no longer just a symbol of the wilderness. It became a vessel for guilt, punishment, and spiritual decay. The curse was said to last 101 nights, a precise and ominous duration filled with isolation, suffering, and silence. There was hope, however, buried within the legend. Release from the curse required a solemn and specific act. Blood must be drawn from the creature. Not a single word could be spoken during the process. The silence was essential. If the ritual was disturbed by speech, the curse remained unbroken. This detail emphasized both the sacred and secretive nature of redemption within the myth, one that mirrored rites of confession and atonement in Catholic tradition. Quebec's loup-garou took on many forms, evolving far beyond the classic wolf image. Some stories describe the creature as a big dog with unnatural eyes. Others claim to see pigs wailing with human voices, owls observing villagers for hours with unsettling focus, or calves that moved with a distorted gait. These variations reflected not only the adaptability of oral storytelling, but also the lingering uncertainty of rural life. Anything strange or unexplainable could be a sign, a warning that someone nearby was carrying a curse. More than a monster lurking in the woods, the loup-garou became a mirror of cultural identity. Its myth intertwined with hardships, religious obedience, and the ever-present fear of moral failure. In the forests and farms of Quebec, its howl wasn't just of hunger. It was the sound of retreat, shame, and the struggle for redemption. And unlike the werewolf of secular horror, the loup-garou emerged from a deeply religious society where sin was not just personal, it was communal. Quebec's Catholic culture, inherited from French colonial roots, infused the myth with spiritual consequences. The loup-garou simply didn't punish, it reminded, it warned, it reflected. The church's teaching on penance, confession, and obedience were central to daily life, and those teachings, when they were ignored, folklore filled the void with fearsome consequences. One of the most persistent beliefs held that breaking the rules of Lent, especially on the 7th consecutive year, could trigger the transformation into a loup-garou. Lent, a sacred season of fasting and reflection, became a spiritual threshold. To cross it carelessly was to risk becoming something unholy. In folklore figures of French and Creole Louisiana, Montagu Summer recounts that in Normandy, any man who was excommunicated became a werewolf for a term of 3 or 7 years. In Basse-Bretagne, the curse could fall on those who hadn't confessed in decades. These beliefs traveled with settlers and took root in Quebec soil, where the loup-garou became a cautionary tale for spiritual neglect. Confession wasn't just a sacrament, it was a safeguard. The absence of confession, especially during Easter, was seen as a moral failing that could invite supernatural punishment. The loup-garou myth reinforced this, portraying the cursed as those who had strayed from grace and refused to seek absolution. The church records from the 19th century often emphasized the importance of regular confession and mass attendance, not only for salvation, but for social cohesion. In the loup-garou danse traditionnelle religieuse québécoise, a scholar, Larry Guowit, writes, "A history of loup-garou is thus located in this story in order to illustrate the chastisement that falls upon those who transgress religious practices, and above all, church duties." The church didn't officially endorse the loup-garou myth, but it didn't need to. These stories served as informal doctrine, passed down from pulpit to hearth. They reinforced obedience, discouraged spiritual neglect, and kept the faithful tethered to tradition. In Swapping Stories, Folk Tales of Louisiana, Louin Petrit recounts a tale told by his father. The loup-garou punishes misbehaving children and kills Catholics who break Lent. Though rooted in Louisiana, the sentiment echoes in Quebec's own moral landscape, where the beast was less a predator and more a parable. New France was a hard place to live. The land was wild, the winters were unforgiving, and the settlements scattered thin across a massive, unfamiliar territory. For early settlers, survival meant more than staying warm. It meant making sense of the unknown. And often, they did that through stories. Folklore became a kind of language in the colony, an explanation for things that couldn't be controlled. Crops failed, children fell sick, livestock acted strangely, and behind all of it, something unseen might have been working. It didn't take long for the fears of the old Europe to settle into this new environment. Beliefs in curses, omens, and evil spirits traveled across the ocean and found new homes in the Canadian wilderness. What had started off as tales of werewolves or demonic possession in France became something more intimate. New France had its own versions, legends shaped by isolation, suspicion, and religious authority. Villagers spoke of loup-garou lurking on the edges of settlements and demons that took shapes of animals or even children. The deeper into the forest, the more vivid those stories became. There's a recorded case from 1660s of a servant girl named Barb Halley, whose house was reportedly struck by flying stones. No hands threw them. She said demons appeared in animal shapes and spoke through her voice. Jesuit priest Paul Regnault took her claims seriously enough to document them, and the bishop ordered an exorcism. It didn't work, and eventually she was bound inside of a sack to keep her safe.
Once upon a time, in the land of everyday moments, there lived a sprinkle of magic called icing sugar photography. From sticky cake smash smiles to wind-swept yes moments, they capture the sugar sweet, the beautifully messy, and everything in between. Whether you're a blushing bride or a blooming family, or just want to freeze time for a second, icing sugar photography is your fairy god lens. Visit icingsugarphotography.com and follow along on Instagram at icingsugarphoto. Let your story sparkle, because life is sweet and memories should be too. All right, creeps, real quick. If you've got a Canadian business or project that you want to reach our spooky little corner of the podcast world, we've got ad space available on Canadian Creepies. And hey, if you're an artist, activist, podcast host, musician, writer, content creator, actor, or just someone with a strange or chilling story to tell, we'd love to hear from you too. We're always open to collaborations with folks who vibe with our creepy, curious little corner of Canada. Email us at CanadianCreepiespodcast@gmail.com and let's get weird together.
These weren't isolated incidences. Another early settler, Renee Besnar, was convicted of casting a sterility curse on a woman who had refused to marry him. She claimed her marriage was cursed, and the local court agreed, and Besnard was banished. Within the religious order, supernatural experiences were reported. Nuns like Catherine de St. Augustine described terrifying nights, beds shaking, tongues freezing during prayer, and demonic figures trying to deceive them. Her visions were dismissed. They were considered part of her spiritual journey. Life was brutally difficult, and explanations weren't always logical. Superstitions worked as a kind of survival strategy, not just physically, but spiritually. In the absence of medicine or certainty, it was easier to believe that the invisible world was just as real as the visible one. Missionary writings and letters from the time painted a picture clearly. Marie de l'Incarnation, a nun writing to her son, described strange lights over the settlement of Trois-Rivières and spoke of sorcery discovered in the country. These weren't campfire tales, they were beliefs held and feared by people trying to make sense of a fragile, unpredictable existence. In New France, the wilderness didn't challenge the body, it pulled at the mind as well, stirred the imagination, and fed stories that still echo through Quebec today. The loup-garou, demons, curses, they weren't just legends, they were part of the landscape. In Quebec's storytelling tradition, the loup-garou often appeared in tales meant to guide everyday behavior, especially for children. These weren't stories designed to simply scare, but to shape how young listeners saw rules, consequences, and communal expectations. Parents and elders often used the loup-garou as a disciplinary tool. Children who misbehaved, wandered too far from home, or refused to follow household rules were warned that the loup-garou might be watching. In some communities, it was said that the beast would come for those who lied, stole, and disrespected their elders. The message was clear: be good, and having good behavior kept the monsters at bay. Folklorist Barry-Jean Ancelet noted that in Cajun and French-Canadian households, tales of the loup-garou were used to instill obedience and discourage wandering. In interviews with elders from rural Quebec, many recall being told not to go into the woods alone or to stay out after dark, not because of wild animals, but because the loup-garou might be lurking. Some stories even tied the creature to religious disciplines. Children who skipped out on catechism or refused to pray were said to be more vulnerable to the curse. The legend became a way to reinforce moral and spiritual boundaries. The tales were about control. They helped parents guide behavior in a world where formal authority was limited and communities' values were everything. The creature worked as a kind of informal rule enforcer, blending the mysterious with the moral. Through these stories, lessons about honesty, respect, and responsibility were passed down with a chill in the air and a warning on the wind. During the 16th and 17th century, parts of Europe treated belief in werewolves as a major legal matter of urgency. Accusations led to actual trials, often tangled with witchcraft cases. Defendants were questioned, tortured, and in extreme cases, executed. Some confessed, describing meeting with evil forces, transforming into animals, and carrying out violent acts. The fear wasn't confined to remote villages. It reached massive courtrooms and cities, leaving a recorded trail of panic and persecution. Germany saw one of its most notorious cases in 1589. A man named Peter Stump was convicted of practicing black magic, transforming into a wolf and committing multiple murders. The punishment was public and brutal. Stories like this weren't isolated. They reflected a widespread concern about the presence of evil in the everyday life, and a belief that justice needed to be addressed. In comparison, Quebec took a different approach. The loup-garou was well known, but never tried in any official courts. Its presence was felt through stories, warnings, and cultural teachings, not legal proceedings. No one was formally charged or punished for transforming or carrying out supernatural deeds. People talked about it in homes, in sermons, and around community gatherings, but it remained part of local imagination and moral instruction. Rather than being viewed as a public threat that required intervention, the loup-garou was seen as a deeply personal affliction. Remedies came through ritual, faith, and silence, not through legal condemnation. The difference raises a curious point. One society leaned into fear through persecution, and the other through storytelling and spiritual reflection. Both believed in the possibility of the beast, but Quebec left it to the shadows, not the judge's bench. The loup-garou may have had its roots in colonial folklore and religious caution, but it hasn't faded into the past. In modern Quebec, the legend still prowls, just in new forms. From Halloween costumes to indie films, the creature continues to inspire artists, musicians, and festival organizers who keep its eerie charm alive. In October, towns across Quebec embrace the supernatural with themed events that nod to local legend. In places like Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu and Trois-Rivières, Halloween parades and haunted forest walks often feature the loup-garou as a central feature. Some communities even host storytelling nights where elders recount old tales of shapeshifters and cursed souls, blending entertainment with tradition. The Quebec Winter Carnival, while not explicitly supernatural, includes ice sculptures and nighttime parades that often feature folkloric creatures, including wolves and mysterious forest spirits. In more niche corners, like the festival like Nuit des Légendes, in smaller towns celebrated regional myths with music, shadow theater, and costumed performances that bring features like the loup-garou to life. In pop culture, the legend has made its way into film and television. The 2024 French-language Netflix film Family Pack reimagines the myth through playful, time-traveling adventure, blending medieval aesthetics with modern humor. The soundtrack, composed by Guillermo Roussel, even includes medieval-style corners of French pop songs like Céline Dion's Gérie ou Trois Heures, performed on the electric lute. Visual artists have also taken up the theme. Quebec's illustrator Mélanie Belliergy has created a series of prints inspired by the regional folklore, including haunting depictions of the loup-garou in moonlit forests. Her work often appears at local art fairs and seasonal exhibitions. And in the music scene, folk rock bands like Les Tres de Roche have been referencing the loup-garou in their lyrics, weaving the creature into songs about rural life, superstition, and the mysteries of the night. Their performances at festivals like Les Francofolies de Montreal often include storytelling interludes that pay homage to Quebec's mystic past. The legends may have changed shape, but it hasn't disappeared. It still howls, but now it's told through speakers, screens, and street parades. The loup-garou may be rooted in century-old folklore, but its presence hasn't faded from local memory. Across Quebec, stories continue to surface, passed down through families, whispered at campfires, or shared in quiet conversations, with those who claim to have seen something they couldn't explain. In the Gatineau region, one of the most retold accounts involves a solitary miller named Joaquin Crete. According to the tale, Crete was a skeptic who dismissed the church and ignored the warnings from his neighbors. After hiring a mysterious stranger named Hubert, livestock began disappearing, and the villagers grew uneasy. On Christmas Eve, Crete skipped midnight mass to play checkers with his guest. That night, he encountered a massive black dog with glowing red eyes in his doorway. The creature lunged, and Crete struck it with a scythe, slicing its ear. When he awoke, Hubert stood over him, his ear bloodied and torn. Crete never spoke again. Other stories are less dramatic but just as unsettling. In the Laurel La Andrière, elders recall hearing strange howls in the woods, too deep for a wolf, too human to ignore. One woman described seeing a large animal watching her from the edge of her property, its eyes reflecting light like polished glass. She said it vanished the moment she whispered a prayer. In the 1980s CBC oral history clip, a farmer from the Maurice region recounted how his grandfather believed their neighbor was a loup-garou. The man never attended mass, kept to himself, and was often seen wandering at night. One winter, the neighbor disappeared for weeks. When he returned, he was gaunt and silent and refused to speak of where he'd been. The family never asked again. These stories aren't always publicly shared. Many come from private conversations, family lore, or regional archives. They carry a sense of caution, not just about the creature itself, but about the boundaries between belief and experience. Whether seen as metaphor or memory, the loup-garou continues to leave its mark not just in books and festivals, but in the quiet corners of everyday life. The loup-garou may be Quebec's most iconic shapeshifter, but it's far from the only creature haunting Canadians' cultural imagination. Across provinces and Indigenous nations, other beings emerge from the myths, each with their own terrifying traits and symbolic weight. These aren't just monsters. They're reflections of fears, taboos, and moral codes that shape the communities who told their stories. Take the Wendigo, for example, rooted in oral traditions of Algonquin-speaking people, particularly the Crete, Innu, and Ojibwe. The Wendigo is a creature born from desperation. It's often described as a gaunt, skeletal figure with glowing eyes and frostbitten skin, wandering the northern forests in search of human flesh. But beneath the horrors lie a deeper warning. The Wendigo represents greed in its purest form, a hunger that grows with every bite, yet is never satisfied. In times of famine, when survival depended on sharing and restraint, the Wendigo myths reminded people that selfishness could destroy not just the individual, but the entire community. Then there's the Skinwalker, a figure of the Navajo tradition that's gained notoriety far beyond its cultural roots. Unlike the Wendigo, which is seen as a tragic transformation, the Skinwalker is a deliberate choice. A person who turns to dark magic, often committing unspeakable acts to gain power to shapeshift. These beings can take forms of wolves, coyotes, owls, and other animals, using their abilities to deceive, harm, or manipulate. The Skinwalker isn't just feared for its power, it's feared for what it represents. The corruption of sacred knowledge, the betrayal of community, and the violation of spiritual balance. Other regional legends echo similar themes. The Inuit community tells tales of the Kalopalik, a sea-dwelling creature that snatches children who wander too close to the ice. It serves as a cautionary story about obedience and safety. In Mi'kmaq lore, the half-faced man is said to appear to those who break taboos, his missing features symbol of moral decay. Even the Sasquatch, often portrayed as a solitary giant, carries undertones of territorial respect and consequences of trespassing into sacred spaces. So what do these shapeshifters say about the cultures that create them? They speak to survival, not just physical, but moral. In harsh environments where cooperation was essential, myths like the Wendigo warred against hoarding and excess. In spiritual systems where balance and harmony are paramount, the Skinwalker embodied the danger of misusing power. These creatures weren't just invented to scare, they were designed to teach, to reinforce boundaries, to preserve the values that held communities together. In a way, they're mirrors, not of what people were, but what they feared they could become. Whether cursed by conscience or transformed by hunger, Canadians' shapeshifters stalk more than just forests. They live in our stories. They linger in whispered warnings from grandparents, in shadows cast across festival stages, in lyrics, dreams, and folklore stretching into the fabric of community. From guilt-driven loup-garou to the ravenous wendigo, each myth has carried fear, morality, and wonder through generations. These creatures mark a place where belief meets imagination, where culture remembers even when history forgets. We don't just reflect the unknown. These shape how we see ourselves, how we hold on to tradition, how we navigate the deep woods of human experience. So, as the campfire dies down and the night gets quiet, remember, these stories don't end. They just wait. Somewhere out there, in the stillness, something watches. And every tale we tell brings it a little closer. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit, your instincts sharp, and your curiosity wider than the dark.
That was an eerie journey down the crooked path with Amanda. How cool was that? If you loved it, don't forget to follow Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Amanda shares some really fun interactive content over there, and trust me, it gets even creepier. Down the Crooked Path is our sister podcast, and you can catch new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're into the paranormal, folklore, and strange little corners of the world, we've got you covered.